The desert wind carried the sound of laughter across the forward operating base. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy, it was the sharp, cutting kind, the kind meant to wound. "Hey, Grandpa, you sure you can even see through that scope anymore, or do you need your reading glasses?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant Derek Costa, 28 years old, all confidence and zero humility, stood with his arms crossed, a smirk plastered across his sun-beaten face. Around him, his team of elite rangers, the youngest, fastest, deadliest unit in the battalion, snickered like hyenas, circling wounded prey. The target of their mockery? A man who said nothing. A man who simply adjusted the lens on his rifle scope with hands that, though weathered, moved with the precision of a watchmaker. His name was Vincent Harrow. He was 61 years old, and in exactly 11 hours, he would take a shot that would save all their lives. But right now, they had no idea who he really was. The briefing tent at Fob Rattlesnake, somewhere in the unforgiving stretches of the Afghan-Pakistan border region, was thick with tension and testosterone. The air conditioning unit wheezed pathetically against the 110-degree heat outside, doing little more than circulating hot air and the smell of sweat-soaked gear. Vincent Harrow sat in the back row, silent as stone. He wore no rank insignia, no unit patch, just a faded tan shirt and cargo pants that had seen better years. His face was a road map of deep lines carved by sun, wind, and decades of things he would never talk about. His hair, more silver than brown now, was cut military short. His eyes, pale gray like winter fog, tracked everything without seeming to look at anything at all. He had been assigned to their unit 3 days ago. No fanfare, no introduction, just a terse email from Battalion Command. Consultant attached to your team for Operation Ridgeline, deferred to his expertise on long-range reconnaissance. Consultant. The word tasted like an insult to men like Staff Sergeant Derek Costa. Costa's team, call sign Viper 6, was the pride of the 75th Ranger Regiment. They were young, most hadn't hit 30 yet, and they were good. They'd done 3 rotations in hostile territory, racked up commendations, survived firefights that would have broken lesser men. They were the tip of the spear, and they knew it. Vincent Harrow, to them, looked like a relic. A washed-up has-been that some desk officer thought they needed for experience. They didn't need experience. They needed speed, aggression, and lethality. All things that, in their eyes, this old man couldn't possibly provide. Captain Raymond Bowler, the officer in charge, stood at the front of the tent with a laser pointer and a digital map projected on a screen. He was all business, square jaw, clipped speech, the kind of officer who led from the front and expected excellence. "Listen up," Bowler began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Operation Ridgeline kicks off at 400 hours. Our target is a high-value individual HVT call sign Scorpion, operating out of a compound in the Coast Mountains, grid reference November 7-3. Intel says he's planning an attack on coalition forces within the next 48 hours. Our job is simple. Get in, neutralize the threat, get out." He clicked to the next slide, a satellite image of a remote mountain compound surrounded by jagged cliffs and narrow passes. The compound sits at 9,000 feet. Terrain is brutal. One access road, heavily watched. We'll insert by helo to a drop zone here. He pointed to a ridge 2 kilometers from the target. And move on foot under cover of darkness. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on confirmed hostiles. Any questions? Corporal Jamie Whitlock, the team's communications specialist, raised a hand. "Sir, what's the weather window looking like?" "Narrow. We've got maybe 6 hours of clear skies before a storm system rolls in. After that, we're grounded until it passes, which could be days. We do this fast, we do this clean." Another ranger, Specialist Louis Navarro, the team's medic, glanced over his shoulder at Vincent. "Captain, what's the old guy's role in all this?" The question landed like a stone in a still pond. Every head turned toward the back of the tent. Vincent didn't react. He simply sat there, hands folded in his lap, expression neutral. Captain Buller's jaw tightened. Mr. Harrow is here as an advisor. He has experience in mountain reconnaissance that will be invaluable to this operation. You will extend him the same respect you'd extend me. Clear? Clear, sir, Navarro muttered, though the skepticism in his voice was impossible to miss. Costa leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't say anything, but his expression said it all. Babysitting duty. After the briefing, the team filtered out into the dust and heat. Gear was checked, rechecked, and checked again. Magazines were loaded, radios tested, night vision calibrated. It was a well-oiled machine, every man moving with purpose. Vincent Harrow walked slowly to the armory tent, where the team's weapons were being prepped. He carried a long black case, hard shell, weatherproof, battered from years of use. He set it down on a workbench and opened it with a soft click. Inside was a rifle, but not just any rifle. It was a Remington M24, an older sniper system that had been phased out in favor of newer models years ago. The weapon looked ancient compared to the cutting-edge gear the Rangers carried. Its stock was worn smooth from use, the bluing on the barrel faded in places, but every part of it gleamed with meticulous care. Costa walked past, saw the rifle, and stopped. He let out a low whistle, not of admiration, but of mockery. "Whoa, check it out. Grandpa brought his museum piece." The other Rangers drifted over, drawn by the comment like sharks to blood. Whitlock grinned. "Dude, is that thing even functional? Looks like it belongs in a display case." "Probably has more confirmed kills than all of us combined," Navarro added with a laugh, "on paper targets at the old folks' home." Vincent said nothing. He ran a cloth down the length of the barrel, inspecting the bore with the kind of attention that spoke of ritual, not routine. Costa leaned against the bench, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look, no offense, man, but maybe you should sit this one out. We're moving fast, covering rough ground. Don't need you slowing us down or tweaking a hip out there." "I'll keep up," Vincent said quietly. His voice was low, gravelly, like stones grinding together. "Yeah?" Costa's smirk widened. "Well, the last time you were in the field anyway? The 90s? Desert Storm?" Vincent's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Then he continued his work, sliding the bolt back, checking the chamber. "I've been in the field." "Doing what? Consulting?" Whitlock snorted. "Man, I bet you haven't fired that thing in anger in 20 years. Vincent looked up then, just briefly. His pale gray eyes met Costa's, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something in that gaze that made the younger man's smile falter. Something cold, something patient, something that had seen things Costa couldn't imagine. But it passed. Vincent looked back down at his rifle. "Guess we'll see," he said softly. Costa straightened, shaking his head. "Whatever, old man. Just stay out of the way when it gets hot." The Rangers walked off, laughing amongst themselves. Vincent Harrow watched them go, his expression unreadable. Then he went back to work, because there was still 11 hours until the mission. 11 hours until everything they thought they knew would be shattered by a single shot in the dark. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Black Hawk's rotors carved through the thin mountain air like a blade through silk. Inside the cargo bay, 8 Rangers sat in 2 rows, their faces painted with camouflage, their eyes hard and focused. The only light came from the red glow of the interior lamps, casting everything in a hellish crimson hue. Staff Sergeant Derek Costa sat across from Vincent, his jaw working a piece of gum methodically. He caught Vincent's eye and gave him a look that was half pity, half amusement. Then he leaned over to Corporal Whitlock and said something that was swallowed by the roar of the engines, but the smirk that followed said enough. Captain Bowler, seated next to the cockpit, pressed a hand to his helmet, listening to communications from command. After a moment, he turned and raised his voice to cut through the noise. "Viper 6, we are boots on ground. Move to waypoint Alpha. Stay tight, stay quiet." They moved like shadows. The terrain was brutal. Sharp rocks, loose scree, narrow ridges with sheer drops on either side. The kind of ground that punished mistakes. The Rangers navigated it with the confidence of youth and training, their movements fluid despite the heavy beer. Vincent Harrow moved differently. He didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, his weight distributed carefully, his eyes constantly reading the ground ahead. He kept pace, but just barely, always at the rear of the formation. After 20 minutes of hard climbing, they reached a plateau overlooking a deep valley. Bowler signaled the halt. The team took a knee, breathing hard from the exertion and altitude. Costa glanced back at Vincent, who was still coming up the final stretch of the climb. The older man's face was slick with sweat, his breathing labored but controlled. When he reached the plateau, he lowered himself onto one knee without a word, his hand resting on the stock of his rifle case. Costa nudged Whitlock and whispered, "Told you, guy's gassed already." Whitlock stifled a laugh. "Man's gonna stroke out before we even reach the compound." Captain Bowler moved to the edge of the plateau and pulled out a pair of binos, scanning the valley below. In the distance, barely visible even with night vision, was the compound, a cluster of low buildings surrounded by stone walls, nestled against the mountainside like a fortress. "Target confirmed," Bowler said quietly. 2 kilometers southeast. We'll approach from the high ground, use the ridgeline for cover." He turned to Vincent. "Harrow, you see anything we should know about?" Vincent rose slowly and moved to the edge. He didn't use binoculars. He just stood there, his eyes scanning the darkness, reading the terrain the way some men read books. After a long moment, he spoke. "The approach from the north ridge is no good. Too exposed. There's a thermal camera mounted on the southeast tower. See the faint glow? They'll pick up heat signatures from 800 meters out." Bowler frowned and looked through his binos again. After a moment, he saw it, a barely perceptible glint of glass catching the moonlight. "Damn, good catch." Bowler lowered the binos and studied the terrain again. "So what's your recommendation?" Vincent pointed toward a narrow gully that wound along the western side of the valley. "That ravine. It's longer, but it'll keep us below their sight lines. We come up through there, we'll hit the compound from the blind side." Costa scoffed under his breath. "That ravine's going to add an hour to our timeline. We don't have that kind of margin." Vincent looked at him, his expression flat. "You'd rather walk straight into their thermal net and get lit up before you're within 1,000 meters? Costa's jaw tightened. He didn't have a comeback for that. Captain Bowler considered for a moment, then nodded. "We take the ravine. Harrow's right. Stealth over speed. Adjust your route. Move out." The team descended into the gully, single file, weapons at the ready. The walls of the ravine rose up on either side, cutting off the moonlight and plunging them into near total darkness. The only sound was the crunch of boots on loose stone and the occasional rattle of gear. Vincent moved near the middle of the formation now, his breathing still heavy but steady. He kept his head on a swivel, his eyes constantly moving, reading shadows and angles. Specialist Navarro, directly behind him, muttered to himself, "Old man's got eyes, I'll give him that." Ahead, Corporal Whitlock suddenly raised a fist. The team froze. "Contact," he whispered into the radio. "Movement 50 meters ahead. 2 personnel." Captain Bowler moved up to the front, signaling the team to take cover behind the rocks. Through his night vision, he could see two figures, guards armed with AK-47s, patrolling the mouth of the ravine. "They're between us and the compound," Bowler whispered. "We need them gone. Quiet." Costa tapped his knife and gave a silent nod. He and another ranger, Sergeant Marcus Clay, began to move forward in a low crouch, preparing to close the distance for a silent takedown. But before they could advance, Vincent's hand shot out, gripping Costa's shoulder. Costa turned, annoyed, ready to shove him off. Vincent shook his head and pointed upward. Costa followed his gaze. High on the ridge above the ravine, barely visible even with night vision, was the third guard, a spotter with a radio, watching the valley below. Costa's eyes widened. If they'd taken out the two guards in the ravine, the spotter would have called it in immediately. The entire mission would have been compromised. Vincent lowered his hand and stepped back into the shadows without a word. Costa stared at him for a long moment, then keyed his radio. "Abort knife work. We've got overwatch. Third hostile, high ground." Bowler cursed under his breath. Options. Vincent moved forward, kneeling beside Bowler. He opened his rifle case with barely a sound and began assembling his rifle with practiced efficiency. Stock, barrel, scope, all fitted together in less than 30 seconds. "I can take all three," Vincent said quietly. "One shot each. They'll drop before anyone knows we're here." Costa stared at him. "You're talking about 3 moving targets in the dark, spread across 100 meters of vertical terrain. With that antique?" Vincent didn't look at him. He was already settling into a prone position, the rifle cradled in his arms, his eye finding the scope. "I'm talking about 3 shots, Vincent said flatly. "Yes or no, Captain?" Bowler looked at the old man, then at the guards, then back again. Every instinct told him this was insane, but something in Vincent Harrow's voice, something cold, something certain, made him pause. "You miss, we're blown." "I won't miss." Captain Bowler hesitated for only a second longer, then nodded. "Take the shot." Vincent Harrow's world narrowed to a circle of glass. Through the scope, the darkness transformed into shades of green and gray, every detail sharp and crystalline. He could see the first guard in the ravine, 60 meters out, shifting his weight from foot to foot, bored. The second guard stood 20 meters beyond him, smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing like a tiny star in the thermal wash. And high above, perched on a rocky outcrop like a vulture, the spotter sat with his radio, scanning the valley below with casual indifference. Vincent's breathing slowed. In, out, in, out. Each breath measured, deliberate, timed to the rhythm of his heartbeat. Around him, the rangers had gone completely still, watching him with a mixture of skepticism and fascination.
Staff Sergeant Costa crouched beside Captain Bowler, his jaw clenched tight. He wanted to say something, to protest, to point out the absurdity of what they were attempting. 3 targets, different elevations, moving independently. Even the best sniper in the battalion would call this shot ambitious, and they were trusting it to a 61-year-old man with a rifle older than most of the team. Vincent's finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Not yet. He was reading the wind, feeling it against his face, watching how it moved the dust on the rocks. The mountain air was unpredictable, swirling in eddies and currents that could push a bullet off course by inches at this range. But Vincent had spent decades learning to read what the wind was saying. His lips moved silently, calculations running through his mind like a computer processing data. Windage, elevation, bullet drop, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, Every variable that could affect the shot accounted for in a fraction of a second. The first guard in the ravine stopped moving. He turned to say something to his companion, presenting his profile. Vincent exhaled halfway and held it. The rifle coughed, a sound so suppressed it was barely louder than a sharp breath. The first guard's head snapped back. He crumpled without a sound, his weapon clattering against the rocks. The second guard turned toward the noise, confused, his cigarette falling from his lips. Vincent had already worked the bolt, the spent casing ejected with a soft metallic click. He found the second target in his scope, adjusted a half-degree left to compensate for a gust of wind. Another exhale, another squeeze. The second shot split the darkness. The guard with the cigarette dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his body folding in on itself. High above, the spotter on the ridge jerked his head up, suddenly alert. He reached for his radio, his mouth opening to shout a warning. Vincent's scope tracked upward. The angle was severe, almost 70 degrees of elevation. The spotter was partially concealed behind a boulder, only his head and shoulders visible. The wind at that altitude was stronger, more erratic. It was a shot that shouldn't be attempted. A shot that any reasonable marksman would call impossible. Vincent's world went silent. He couldn't hear the Rangers breathing beside him, couldn't hear the wind, couldn't hear his own heartbeat. There was only the crosshairs, the target, and the space between them. He adjusted for wind, adjusted for drop, adjusted for the rotation of the earth itself. Then he fired. The third shot echoed off the ravine walls, a ghost of sound that faded almost instantly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the spotter slumped forward over the boulder, his radio tumbling from his hand and bouncing down the rocks in a series of sharp cracks before disappearing into the darkness below. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Vincent worked the bolt one last time, ejecting the final casing. He caught it in his palm before it could hit the ground, an old habit from years of leaving no trace, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he safed the rifle and looked up at Captain Bowler. "Clear," he said quietly. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The Rangers stared at Vincent Harrow as if seeing him for the first time. Corporal Whitlock's mouth hung open. "Holy, did that just—" Specialist Navarro shook his head slowly, his eyes wide. 3 shots, 3 kills, in less than 10 seconds. Staff Sergeant Costa said nothing. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, his earlier smirk completely erased. Captain Bowler let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He clapped Vincent on the shoulder, a gesture of respect, of gratitude, of recognition. "Unstanding work, Harrow. That was exceptional." Vincent nodded once, his face showing no emotion. He began disassembling his rifle with the same methodical precision that he'd used to put it together, each piece fitting back into the case like a puzzle. "We're clear to advance," Bowler continued, turning to the team. "Move up. Silent protocol. Watch your spacing." The Rangers began moving forward, stepping carefully around the bodies of the fallen guards. As they passed Vincent, several of them glanced at him with new eyes, eyes that held questions, curiosity, and something that might have been the first glimmer of respect. Sergeant Marcus Clay, a quiet man who rarely spoke, paused beside Vincent as he finished packing his rifle. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Clay asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vincent closed the case with a soft click. "Long time ago. Different war." Clay waited, hoping for more, but Vincent just stood and shouldered his rifle case, ready to move. They advanced through the ravine in silence, the memory of those 3 impossible shots hanging in the air like smoke. The terrain grew steeper, the walls of the gully narrowing until they were moving single file through gaps barely wide enough for a man with a full combat load. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the ravine onto a rocky shelf that overlooked the compound. They were less than 300 meters from the target now, close enough to see the dim lights in the windows and the shadows of more guards moving along the perimeter walls. Captain Bowler raised his fist, signaling another halt. The team took cover behind a cluster of boulders while Captain Bowler studied the compound through his binos. 4 guards on the walls, he whispered into the radio. 2 at the main gate. 3 more inside the courtyard. HVT location still unknown. Vincent moved up beside him, scanning the compound with his naked eye. After a moment, he pointed to a building in the northeastern corner, a small structure with reinforced walls and a single heavily secured door.
There, Vincent said. That's where he'll be. It's the only building with blast-resistant construction. And see the SATCOM antenna on the roof? That's command and control. Buller looked where Vincent was pointing, then nodded slowly. You're probably right. He turned to Costa. How do you want to breach? Costa tore his eyes away from Vincent and forced himself back into tactical mode. We split into 2 teams. Alpha takes the main gate, draws their attention. Bravo circles around, hits the target building from the rear, fast and loud. No, Vincent said. Costa's head whipped toward him. Excuse me? You go in loud, you lose the HVT, Vincent continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. He'll have an escape tunnel. Every compound like this does. You breach the front, he's out the back before you clear the first room. Costa's face flushed red. And I suppose you've got a better plan? Vincent met his gaze evenly. We don't breach. We wait. He'll come out. Come out? Costa's voice rose with frustration. Why the hell would he come out? Vincent looked back at the compound, because in about 30 seconds, he's going to think his perimeter's been compromised. And when that happens, people like him don't hunker down, they run. What are you talking about? Captain Bowler asked, confused. We've been completely silent. They have no idea we're here. Vincent glanced at his watch. They will. As if on cue, a voice suddenly crackled through the night air, a panicked shout in Pashto coming from somewhere inside the compound. Lights began flicking on in the buildings. Men emerged from doorways, weapons in hand, shouting to each other in confusion. The Rangers stared in shock. What the? Whitlock began. Vincent's expression remained unchanged. The spotter on the ridge, when he didn't check in at his scheduled time, they got nervous. Now they're doing a security sweep. Captain Bowler's eyes widened with understanding. They're gonna find the bodies. In about 2 minutes, Vincent confirmed. And when they do, the HVT will evacuate through the back tunnel. That's when we take him. Costa looked at Vincent with something between disbelief and dawning respect. You knew this would happen. You planned for it. Vincent said nothing. He just opened his rifle case again and began assembling his weapon for the second time that night. Because in 2 minutes, the real mission would begin. And Vincent Harrow still had work to do. The compound erupted into chaos. Shouts echoed off the stone walls as guards scrambled to their positions, weapons raised, scanning the darkness beyond the perimeter. Flashlights swept across the rocky terrain like searchlights, creating moving shadows that danced against the mountainside. Inside the main building, figures moved with urgent purpose behind curtained windows. Captain Bowler watched through his binoculars, his jaw tight. They know something's wrong. They're going to lock down protocols. No, Vincent said, his eye already pressed to his scope. Watch the northwest corner, behind that storage shed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if summoned by Vincent's words, a section of ground near the rear wall shifted. A wooden hatch, camouflaged with dirt and rocks, slowly lifted from below. There, Vincent whispered, the tunnel exit. A figure emerged from the darkness beneath the hatch. He was dressed in dark clothing, a scarf wrapped around his face, moving with the quick, practiced efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this escape many times. 2 armed guards followed him out, scanning the area with their weapons raised. That Scorpion, Bowler confirmed, studying the figure's movement patterns against their intelligence photos. He's rabbiting. The HVT and his guards moved quickly away from the compound, heading for a rocky path that wound up the mountainside toward what looked like a vehicle staging area. In the distance, barely visible in the darkness, was the shape of a truck. He's going for wheels, Specialist Navarro said. Once he's mobile, we lose him.
Costa was already moving, signaling his team. We intercept before he reaches the vehicle. Move fast, move quiet. Clay, Whitlock, you're with me. We'll cut him off at... Stop, Vincent said. Costa's head whipped toward him. What now? Vincent didn't look away from his scope. Look at the approach. Look at the terrain. Captain Bowler raised his binoculars and studied the path the HVT was taking. At first, it seemed straightforward, a winding trail through loose rocks and scrub brush. But as his eyes adjusted, he began to see what Vincent was seeing. The ground was too clean, too perfect. In an area where every other patch of earth was cluttered with stones and debris, this particular path was suspiciously clear. And along the edges, almost invisible in the darkness, were thin lines, barely thicker than fishing wire, stretched across the trail at ankle height. Tripwires, Bowler breathed. The whole approach is rigged. Vincent nodded slowly. He's not running blind. He's leading anyone who follows him into a kill zone. IEDs probably daisy-chained. One man steps on them, they all go. Costa stared at the trail, his face pale. If Vincent hadn't stopped him, he and his team would have charged straight into that trap. They would have been torn apart before they even realized their mistake. Whitlock's voice was quiet, almost awed. How did you see that? Vincent's answer was simple. Experience. The HVT and his guards were moving faster now, almost to the staging area. In less than 2 minutes, they'd be in the vehicle and gone, disappearing into the mountains, where even satellite imagery would lose them in the maze of valleys and ridges. Captain Bowler's mind raced through options. They couldn't pursue on foot. The kill zone made that impossible. They couldn't call in air support. The storm system was already rolling in, and they were minutes away from zero visibility. And they couldn't let Scorpion escape. Too many lives depended on stopping whatever attack he was planning.
We're out of options, Bowler said, his voice strained. We can't reach him in time. Vincent's finger moved to his trigger. I can. Costa turned to him, his eyes wide. That's got to be 800 meters, uphill, in wind, with a moving target. 840 meters, Vincent corrected, his voice utterly calm. Wind is gusting east-northeast at 12 knots. Target is moving at approximately 4 kilometers per hour, angled 20 degrees away from my position. He paused, making microscopic adjustments to his scope. I can make the shot. Captain Bowler looked at the distance, looked at the wind, looked at the impossible geometry of what Vincent was proposing. Every tactical manual, every training course, every instructor he'd ever had would have told them this was beyond the capabilities of even the best marksman. But he'd also watched Vincent Harrow make 3 impossible shots less than an hour ago. If you miss, Bowler said carefully, he'll know we're here. He'll disappear into that truck and we'll never find him. Vincent's breathing had already slowed into that same controlled rhythm from before. I won't miss. There was no bravado in his voice, no confidence, just a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty as someone saying the sun would rise tomorrow. Captain Bowler made his decision. Take the shot. The world went still. Vincent's eye was pressed against the scope, his cheek welded to the stock. Through the glass, he could see the HVT clearly now. A figure in dark clothing, moving with purpose toward the truck. His guards flanked him, their heads on a swivel, watching for threats. But they were watching the wrong direction. Vincent's mind processed the variables with mechanical precision. Distance, 843 meters. Elevation change, 62 meters uphill. Wind, gusting, inconsistent, pushing from right to left. Target speed decreasing as he approached the vehicle. Bullet drop at this range, significant, requiring compensation of nearly 8 feet. And then there was the most difficult variable of all, the human one. The HVT wasn't walking in a straight line. He was moving in a natural, unpredictable gait, his path slightly curved, his speed varying moment to moment. Vincent would have to predict where the man would be when the bullet arrived. He would have to shoot not at where the target was, but where the target would be in the 1.2 seconds it took for the round to travel nearly half a mile. The HVT reached the truck. His hand touched the door handle. Vincent's finger moved to the trigger. The ranges around him had stopped breathing.
Even Costa was completely still, watching with an intensity that bordered on disbelief. The HVT pulled the door open, 1 foot lifting to step inside. Vincent exhaled halfway and squeezed. The rifle roared. The sound was massive in the thin mountain air, echoing off the rocks like thunder. The muzzle flash lit up their position for a split second before darkness returned. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, 843 meters away, the HVT's body jerked violently backward. He spun away from the truck, his arms flailing, and collapsed onto the rocky ground in a heap. His guards immediately dropped into defensive positions, weapons up, scanning frantically for the shooter. But they were looking in all the wrong places, their eyes searching the nearby rocks, never imagining that death had come from nearly a kilometer away. Captain Boulder's voice was barely a whisper. Confirm target down. Corporal Whitlock, watching through a high-powered scope, took a moment to find his voice. Target down, direct hit, center mass. He's not getting up. A collective exhale rippled through the team. Several Rangers turned to look at Vincent with expressions that had transformed completely from the mockery of a few hours ago. What they saw now was something else entirely, something they couldn't quite name. Vincent worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing into his palm. He studied it for a moment, still warm, still smelling of burnt powder, then slipped it into his pocket with the others. He began breaking down his rifle with the same methodical care he'd shown all night. Staff Sergeant Costa stood frozen, staring at the distant figure lying motionless beside the truck. His mind was struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. The mathematics alone were staggering, but to execute it under pressure, in combat conditions, with lives hanging on the balance. "Who are you?" Costa said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Vincent didn't look up from his work. "Just a consultant." "Bullshit," Costa said harder now, not angry, demanding. "Nobody shoots like that. Nobody. That was legendary." Captain Bowler was already on the radio, coordinating with command, arranging for extraction and confirming mission success. But even as he spoke in crisp military jargon, his eyes kept drifting back to Vincent Harrow, watching the old man pack his rifle away with hands that showed no tremor, no adrenaline, no sign that he'd just made one of the most difficult shots any of them had ever seen. Sergeant Marcus Clay moved closer to Vincent, his voice quiet. "Sir, I've been in the Rangers for 8 years. I've trained with Delta, worked alongside SEALs, seen some of the best shooters in the world, and I've never seen anything like what you just did, not even close." Vincent closed his rifle case and stood, shouldering the weight. "You've got good men here, Sergeant. They'll learn." "Learn?" Clay shook his head slowly. "You can't learn that. That's not training. That's something else." Vincent's pale gray eyes met his for a moment. In that brief glance, Clay saw something he hadn't noticed before. A depth, a weight, a history that went far beyond anything he could imagine. "Everyone can learn," Vincent said quietly. "The question is whether they're willing to pay the price."
Before Clay could ask what he meant, a new sound cut through the night air. Not the crack of gunfire or the shouts of enemies. This was something worse. It was the high-pitched whistle of incoming mortar fire. Captain Bowler's head snapped up. "Incoming! Take cover!" The guards at the compound had finally located their general direction, and now they were about to make the Rangers pay for it. The night exploded into fire and chaos as the first mortar round impacted 50 meters from their position, sending shrapnel screaming through the air and showering them with rocks and debris. The mission had just become a fight for survival, and they were about to discover that Vincent Harrow's talents extended far beyond a sniper rifle. The mountain erupted in fire and steel. The first mortar round detonated with a flash that turned night into day, the concussion wave slamming into the Rangers like a physical wall. Rock fragments and superheated metal screamed through the air, pinging off boulders and equipment. Before the echo faded, a second round hit, then a third, walking their way across the ridge in a deadly pattern. "Move! Move! Move!" Captain Bowler's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back to the ravine!" The Rangers scattered, each man moving with the trained instinct of soldiers under fire. They bounded from cover to cover, zigzagging across the rocky terrain as more mortar rounds rained down around them.
The compound's defenders might not have known exactly where the shot came from, but they had a general direction, and they were saturating the entire hillside with indirect fire. Corporal Whitlock dove behind a boulder just as a round impacted where he'd been standing a second before. The explosion lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the rock face. He lay there for a moment, stunned, ears ringing, tasting copper and dust. A hand grabbed his harness and hauled him upright. It was Vincent Harrow, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes sharp and clear despite the maelstrom around them. "On your feet, Corporal," he said, his voice cutting through the ringing in Whitlock's ears. "Stay low, keep moving." Whitlock nodded dumbly and stumbled forward, Vincent's hand on his shoulder guiding him toward better cover. Another round screamed overhead, impacting 30 meters upslope, sending a cascade of loose rocks tumbling down toward them. Staff Sergeant Costa was already at the entrance of the ravine, waving his team in. "Through here! Go, go, go!" Specialist Navarro and Sergeant Clay rushed past him, followed by 2 other rangers. Captain Bowler came next, his radio pressed to his ear, shouting coordinates to the extraction team over the sound of explosions. "Viper 6 to Overwatch. We are under heavy indirect fire. Request immediate exfil, grid November 7-4 Alpha. We are combat ineffective if we stay on this ridge." The response was barely audible through the static and noise. "Viper 6, Overwatch. Storm front is moved in faster than projected. Visibility is near 0. We cannot launch birds until it clears. You need to find shelter and wait it out. Overwatch, out." The radio went silent. Captain Bowler cursed under his breath and grabbed Costa by the shoulder. "We're stuck here. Find us a defensive position, somewhere they can't drop mortars on our heads." Another round impacted, closer this time. The shockwave knocked 2 rangers off their feet. One of them, a young private named Daniel Cross, screamed, a high, sharp sound of pain that cut through everything else. "Medic!" someone shouted. Specialist Navarro was there in seconds, sliding to a stop beside Cross. The private was clutching his leg, blood seeping through his fingers. Shrapnel had torn through his calf, shredding muscle and possibly nicking an artery. Navarro ripped open his medical kit, his hands moving with practiced speed. "I've got you, Cross. Stay with me. Don't look at it. Look at me." Cross's face was sheet white, his breathing rapid and shallow. Shock was setting in fast. Vincent appeared beside Navarro, dropping to one knee. "How bad?" Navarro's face was grim. "Bad. He's losing blood fast. I can stabilize him, but he needs a hospital in the next few hours or he's not going to make it." Vincent looked at the young private's face, barely 20 years old, eyes wide with fear and pain, and something shifted in his expression. Something old and tired and sad. "Do what you can," Vincent said quietly. "We'll get him out." Another salvo of mortars screamed down. The rangers pressed themselves against the rocks, praying the ancient stone would be enough to shield them from the storm of steel. The bombardment was getting more accurate. Whoever was directing that fire knew their business. Costa crawled up beside Captain Bowler, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "Sir, we can't stay here. They're going to bracket us, and when they do, this whole ridge is going to come down on our heads." "I know," Bowler said through gritted teeth. "Options? We go deeper into the ravine system, find a cave or an overhang, something with hard cover overhead. We hole up until the weather breaks and exfil can reach us." Bowler nodded. "Do it. Get everyone?" "Captain!" It was Sergeant Clay, his voice urgent. "We've got movement down below. Armed personnel moving up the mountain, at least 20 hostiles, maybe more."
Bowler crawled to the edge and looked down through his night vision. Sure enough, figures were climbing the slope. Militants from the compound, armed with AK-47s and RPGs, moving in a coordinated assault pattern. They weren't content to just shell the Rangers. They were coming to finish the job personally. "They're flanking us," Costa said, his voice tight. "If they get above us on that ridge, we're trapped." Captain Bowler's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. They were pinned between mortar fire from the compound and armed fighters climbing to cut off their escape. Private Cross was wounded and needed immediate evacuation. The weather had grounded their extraction, and they had maybe 10 minutes before those militants reached their position. It was a tactical nightmare. Vincent Harrow moved up beside them, his rifle case already open, his weapon coming together in his hands with mechanical efficiency. "How many did you count?"
Vincent asked calmly, as if they were discussing a training exercise rather than a potential massacre. 20, maybe 25. Spread out in a skirmish line. They're using the terrain well. Professional. Vincent slid his rifle forward and settled into a prone position behind a rock, his eye finding the scope. Through the green glow of night vision, he could see the advancing fighters clearly now. Dark shapes moving with purpose, using cover, communicating with hand signals. I can slow him down, buy you time to move cross and find hard cover. Costa stared at him. You're talking about engaging 24 hostiles by yourself. I'm talking about doing my job, Vincent replied, without taking his eye from the scope. Captain Bowler knew they didn't have a choice. How long can you hold him? Vincent's finger moved to the trigger. Long enough. We're not leaving you behind, Harrow, Bowler said firmly. We suppress, we move cross to cover, then we all displace together. Clear? Vincent didn't respond. He was already tracking his first target. The lead militant was moving up a narrow path between two boulders, confident they were still out of range. He was wrong. Vincent's rifle spoke once. The militant dropped. The others immediately hit the ground, seeking cover, their advance halting. They began scanning the darkness, trying to locate the shooter. One of them raced his radio to call in their position. Vincent's second shot took him in the chest before he could speak. Panic rippled through the assault force. They began firing wildly uphill, spraying automatic weapons fire in a general direction, hoping to suppress whatever was killing them. Rounds sparked off rocks around Vincent's position, but he didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his aim, controlled his breathing, and fired again. Another militant fell. Move, Vincent called over his shoulder. Get cross out of here. Navarro and Clay grabbed the wounded private, making a stretcher from a poncho and 2 rifles. They hauled him deeper into the ravine, while Costa and the others provided covering fire, their rifles barking in short, controlled bursts. The militants were getting organized now. An RPG team was setting up, preparing to launch a rocket at Vincent's position. If that hit, it wouldn't matter how good his cover was. The overpressure alone would kill him. Vincent saw them through his scope. The gunner was settling the launcher on his shoulder. The assistant gunner was loading the rocket. Distance, 420 meters. Wind, erratic. Target, partially concealed. Difficult shot, but far from impossible. Vincent exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The round traveled through the air with mathematical precision, covering the distance in less than a second. It struck the RPG warhead just as the assistant gunner was sliding it into the launcher. The rocket detonated in his hands. The explosion was massive, a fireball that lit up the entire mountainside. The 2-man team was vaporized instantly. The fighters nearest them were thrown backward by the blast, screaming, burning. The assault broke. The remaining militants scrambled backward down the slope, abandoning their attack, no longer caring about tactics or objectives. They just wanted to get away from whatever nightmare was hunting them from the darkness. Vincent watched them retreat through his scope, and then slowly rose to his feet. His shoulder ached from the recoil, his hands were starting to feel the cold, but his expression remained unchanged, calm, methodical, professional. He turned and moved deeper into the ravine, following the team. Captain Bowler was waiting for him at a bend in the path, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. You detonated an RPG warhead from 400 meters away. Vincent shouldered his rifle. They were about to use it on us. Seemed more efficient. Efficient, Bowler repeated, almost laughing despite the situation. That's one word for it. They moved quickly now, going deeper into the ravine system. The mortar fire had slacked off. With their ground assault repelled, the compound defenders were conserving ammunition, waiting to see what happened next. 50 meters into the ravine, Sergeant Clay found what they were looking for. A deep cave carved into the rock face, its entrance partially concealed by fallen boulders. It was defensible, protected from overhead fire, and deep enough to shelter the entire team. Everyone inside, Captain Bowler ordered. Set up a perimeter at the entrance. Navarro, how's Cross? The medic was working by the light of a red lens flashlight, his hands covered in blood. Bleeding's under control, but he's in bad shape. Fever starting. Without proper medical care, he's got maybe 6 hours. 6 hours. And the storm could last for days. Costa slammed his fist against the rock wall in frustration. This is foobar. We're trapped in a cave surrounded by hostiles with a man bleeding out and no way to call for help. There's a way, Vincent said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. What are you talking about? Bowler asked.
Vincent moved to the cave entrance and looked out at the dark mountain, then turned back to face the team. His weathered face was shattered, unreadable in the dim light. "I'm talking about going back down there," Vincent said, "to the compound." The cave went silent. Costa's voice was incredulous. "That's suicide. There's got to be 40 hostiles down there, and they're on high alert." Vincent's pale gray eyes were steady, certain. Not suicide, necessity. They have vehicles. They have a radio. And Cross doesn't have time for us to wait. He let that sink in, then continued. "I'll go alone. Get to their motor pool. Acquire transport. Bring it back. We load Cross, drive to the extraction point at the base of the mountain. Weather's clearer at lower elevation. Birds can pick us up there." Captain Bowler shook his head. "That's not a plan. That's a death wish. You'd have to infiltrate a hostile compound, steal a vehicle under their noses, and drive it back through a kill zone." "Yes," Vincent said simply. "We can't ask you to do that," Bowler said, his voice pained. Vincent's expression softened slightly. "You're not asking, Captain. I'm volunteering. That boy doesn't die on this mountain. Not while I can do something about it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Staff Sergeant Derek Costa stepped forward, his face serious. Vincent turned to look at Staff Sergeant Derek Costa, studying the younger man's face in the dim light of the cave. The mockery was gone. The arrogance had been burned away by fire and reality. What remained was something different. A soldier who had finally understood what he was looking at. "You don't have to do this," Vincent said quietly. Costa's jaw set with determination. "Yes, I do. You've saved our asses 3 times tonight. I'm not letting you walk into that compound alone. Besides," he added with a ghost of his old confidence, "you might be able to shoot, old man, but you're going to need someone to watch your 6. Captain Bowler looked between them, his face conflicted. Every tactical bone in his body told him this was insane, but every leadership instinct told him that Private Cross would die without intervention. And he'd watched Vincent Harrow do the impossible enough times tonight to know that betting against him was a losing proposition. "If you're going to do this," Bowler said finally, "you do it smart. Get in, get wheels, get out. No heroics. Cross's life depends on you making it back." Vincent nodded once. He handed his rifle case to Sergeant Clay. "Keep this safe. I'll want it back." Clay took the case with reverence, like he was being handed a holy relic. "Yes, sir." Vincent and Costa geared down, stripping off anything that would make noise or slow them down. They kept their sidearms, knives, and one radio between them. Vincent pulled a dark wool cap over his gray hair and smeared camouflage paint across his weathered face. Costa did the same. Corporal Whitlock approached them, his expression serious. "Sir, I just want to say, what you did out there tonight, I've never seen anything like it. And I'm sorry for—" Vincent held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't apologize for being young, Corporal. Just learn from it." Specialist Navarro came over next, his hands still stained with Cross's blood. "Bring back that vehicle, sir, please. That kid deserves to see his family again." "He will," Vincent said, with quiet certainty. The 2 men moved to the cave entrance. Outside, the night was darker than before. The storm clouds had rolled in completely, blocking even the moonlight. It was the kind of darkness that swallowed everything. Perfect cover. They slipped out of the cave and began their descent toward the compound. They moved slowly, deliberately, using every scrap of terrain the offered. The mountain was quiet now. The mortar fire had stopped,
and the militants who'd attempted the assault had retreated back to the compound to lick their wounds. But the enemy would be on high alert, expecting another attack. They reached the edge of the ravine and paused, studying the compound below. Lights were on in several buildings. Guards paced the walls with flashlights, their silhouettes visible against the glow. The main gate was reinforced now, with additional sentries posted. Costa leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "How do we get in? That place is locked down tight." Vincent pointed to the northwestern corner, the same area where the Scorpion Tunnel exit had been. "We go in the same way Scorpion tried to go out, through the escape tunnel." They circled wide, staying low, moving through the darkness like ghosts. It took them 20 minutes to reach the hidden hatch. Vincent knelt beside it, running his fingers along the edges, feeling for tripwires or alarms. Nothing. In their panic after Scorpion's death, the defenders had forgotten to secure their own escape route. Vincent lifted the hatch slowly, revealing a dark shaft leading down into the earth. A wooden ladder descended into blackness. He looked at Costa and gestured, "I'll go first." Costa nodded. Vincent climbed down into the tunnel, his feet finding the rungs by feel. The air was cooler down here, smelling of damp earth and old timber. When he reached the bottom, he drew his sidearm and waited for Costa to descend. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one man to walk upright. It stretched ahead into darkness, rough-hewn walls shored up with timber supports. Somewhere ahead they could hear voices, muffled, distant, speaking in Pashto. They moved forward slowly, weapons raised, every sense heightened. The tunnel curved slightly, and then began to slope upward. After 30 meters, they saw light ahead, a vertical shaft with another ladder leading up to a trap door.
Vincent climbed carefully, pressing his ear against the wooden door above. He could hear movement on the other side, but it sounded distant. He waited, counting heartbeats, timing the footsteps. Then he pushed the trapdoor open a crack. They were inside a storage building, dark, filled with crates and supplies. The voices were coming from outside, guards talking by the main building. Vincent opened the trapdoor wider and pulled himself up, then reached down to help Costa. They were inside the compound. Costa scanned their surroundings, his heart hammering. "Where's the motor pool?" Vincent pointed toward a structure on the eastern side of the compound, a covered area where several vehicles were parked. 2 technicals, pickup trucks with mounted machine guns, and what looked like a larger cargo truck. "There," Vincent whispered. "We take the cargo truck. More room for Cross." They moved between buildings, staying in shadows, avoiding the pools of light cast by the security lamps. A guard walked past 20 feet away, his AK-47 slung casually over his shoulder, smoking a cigarette. He never saw them. They reached the motor pool. The cargo truck sat in the back, its keys, miraculously, hanging on a hook inside a small guard shack, probably left there after the chaos of the evening, forgotten in the confusion. Costa grabbed the keys while Vincent checked the truck. It was old, a Soviet-era vehicle that had seen better decades, but the engine looked maintained. The fuel gauge showed half a tank, enough to get them to the extraction point at the base of the mountain. "We've got one shot at this," Costa whispered. "The second we start that engine, every hostile in this compound is going to come running." Vincent nodded. "So we make sure they're busy looking the wrong direction." He moved to one of the technicals and quickly rigged the machine gun so it would fire on its own. A simple trick using a piece of cord tied to the trigger and a burning cigarette as a time delay. He positioned the weapon to fire toward the main gate. "When that starts shooting," Vincent explained, "they'll think we're attacking from outside. Gives us maybe 60 seconds before they figure it out." Costa grinned despite himself. "Old man, you're full of surprises." Vincent lit the cigarette with a match and wedged it into position. "Get into truck. Be ready to move." Costa climbed into the driver's seat while Vincent moved to the compound's main electrical junction, a crude box of wires and breakers mounted on a pole. He He pulled out his knife and with one quick motion severed the main power line. The compound plunged into darkness. Shouts of confusion erupted from multiple directions. Flashlights began sweeping the area frantically. Then, the technical's machine gun opened fire. The staccato burst of automatic weapons fire echoed off the walls. Tracer rounds streaked toward the main gate, and suddenly every defender in the compound was running in that direction, convinced they were under attack. Vincent sprinted back to the truck and jumped into the passenger seat. "Go!" Costa turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and for one heart-stopping moment, Vincent thought it wouldn't start. Then it roared to life. Costa slammed the vehicle into gear and floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, barreling out of the motor pool and straight toward the compound's rear wall, not the reinforced main gate, but a section of older stone that had begun to crumble. "Hold on!" Costa shouted. The truck hit the wall at 40 kilometers per hour. Stone exploded outward. The vehicle burst through in a shower of debris and kept going, bouncing wildly over the rocky ground beyond. Behind them, the compound erupted in chaos. Gunfire erupted, not the controlled burst of the technical, but the wild spray of panic. Militants were shooting at shadows, at each other, at anything that moved. Costa wrestled with the steering wheel, navigating by instinct more than sight. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness as they raced up the mountain path. "They're coming after us," Costa yelled, checking the mirror. Vincent turned to look. 2 sets of headlights had appeared behind them, the remaining technical and another vehicle, giving chase. The technical's machine gun opened fire, rounds sparking off the rocks around them. Vincent rolled down his window and leaned out, his sidearm in hand. The wind tore at his face as he aimed backward at the pursuing vehicles. It was an impossible shot, shooting backward from a moving vehicle at targets bouncing over rough terrain in the dark. But Vincent Harrow had made a career of impossible shots. He fired 3 times. The first round missed, the second shattered the technical's windshield, the third found the driver. The technical swerved wildly and rolled, tumbling down the mountainside in a cascade of metal and flame. The second vehicle kept coming. "How much further?" Vincent called to Costa. 2 kilometers to the cave, maybe 3 minutes if we don't break an axle on these rocks." Vincent reloaded calmly as his hand steadied despite the violence of the ride. The pursuing vehicle was gaining, its driver more skilled and more desperate. They couldn't outrun it, so Vincent would have to stop it. He aimed carefully, waiting for the road to straighten. When it did, he had one clear moment, one perfect shot at the vehicle's engine block. He took it. The round punched through the radiator and into the engine. Steam erupted from under the hood. The vehicle began to slow, smoke pouring from its front end. Within seconds, it had fallen far behind, crippled. Costa let out a whoop of relief. That's how you do it. They reached the ravine 2 minutes later. Costa brought the truck to a skidding stop near the cave entrance. The Rangers were already there, weapons ready, having heard them coming.
Captain Bowler ran forward. "You actually did it! You crazy sons of... Get Cross in the vehicle! Move, move, move!" Specialist Navarro and Sergeant Clay carefully loaded the wounded private into the back of the truck. Cross was semi-conscious now, his skin gray, but he was still breathing. "Everyone in," Bowler ordered. "We're going to lower elevation, finding clear sky for exfil." The Rangers piled into the back of the truck. Vincent climbed in last, Costa sliding over to let someone else drive. As the vehicle lurched into motion, heading down the mountain, Staff Sergeant Costa looked at Vincent with something approaching reverence. "Who are you really?" Costa asked quietly. "And don't give me that consultant line. Nobody does what you did tonight without serious history." Vincent was silent for a long moment, watching the mountain recede behind them. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the engine. 25 years ago, I was part of a program. We didn't have unit patches or official designations. We went places the government couldn't acknowledge. We did things that couldn't be recorded. And when we came home, we were told to forget it ever happened. He turned to look at Costa, his pale gray eyes reflecting the dim light. "I was a ghost. I've been a ghost for a long time. But tonight, that boy back there," he gestured toward Private Cross, He needed me to be something more than a ghost. So I was. Costa nodded slowly, understanding washing over him. Thank you, sir, for everything. Vincent just looked back at the mountain. 30 minutes later, they reached the base. The storm was thinner here, the clouds higher. Captain Bowler got on the radio, and within minutes they heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the thump of helicopter rotors cutting through the air. 2 Black Hawks descended through the clouds, landing in a clearing. Medics rushed to Private Cross, loading him onto a stretcher and into the first bird. The rest of the team piled into the second. As the helicopters lifted off, Vincent Harrow sat by the open door, watching Afghanistan fade into the darkness below. Costa sat beside him, exhausted but alive. You saved our lives tonight. All of us. We were arrogant. We were disrespectful. And you saved us anyway. Why? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, because that's what soldiers do. We take care of our own, no matter what. 3 weeks later, at Fort Benning, a ceremony was held. Private Daniel Cross, recovered from his wounds, stood at attention alongside his team. Before the entire Ranger Battalion, Vincent Harrow was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. Staff Sergeant Derek Costa stood in the front row, watching. When the medal was pinned to Vincent's chest, Costa saluted, a sharp, perfect salute that held more respect than 1,000 words could convey. After the ceremony, Costa approached Vincent as the old man was preparing to leave. Where will you go now? Costa asked. Vincent shouldered his rifle case, returned to him by Sergeant Clay, and gave a small smile. Somewhere quiet, at least until the next time someone needs a consultant. Costa extended his hand. If you ever need anything, sir, anything at all, you call me. You saved my life, sir. I owe you everything. Vincent shook his hand firmly. You don't owe me anything, Sergeant. Just pass it on. Teach the next generation. Make them better than we were. He turned and walked away across the parade ground, a solitary figure with silver hair and a weathered face. To anyone watching, he looked like just another old veteran heading home. But Staff Sergeant Derek Costa knew better. He knew he'd spent one night in the mountains with a living legend, a ghost who had stepped out of the shadows one more time to save lives. And as Vincent Harrow disappeared into the distance, Costa made a silent promise. He would never forget the lesson that old man had taught him, that true strength isn't loud. True courage doesn't need recognition, and the most dangerous warriors are often the ones who look like they couldn't hurt a fly, the ones nobody sees coming, the ones who've been doing this so long the impossible has become routine, the ghosts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.